Okay, during the break, I renamed this method for no particular reason except I didn't like its name, commented out a call to it, and added a new method called test bowling. We're going to rebuild our bowling app. It's been a long time. We're going to rebuild that today, but before we do, a couple of quick announcements. If you've been watching the sign outside, next Monday, all day classes are canceled. So a week from today, the day classes are canceled, which means ours is not. I will be here lecturing at 6 o'clock. However, the following Monday, I had vacation scheduled before you guys came along, and I'm still going. So I'm going to give you some next week. I'm going to give you some big, huge monster, keep you busy for 2 weeks project while I'm gone that week. Okay. The next thing we want to take care of here is learning how to turn this into an object-oriented type program. So how to create an object that we can then reference from our project. The tricky part here is, where do you put the darn thing? Do you put it in the Java folder? Does it go in its own folder? Where do you put this class that we want to define? And I had to look it up and read it 6 times before I understood it. But bottom line is, in your project, and this is your project. Right, so your main activity is already in the project. If you want classes that are part of this project, you add them to this little project folder, not the test folder, but the one where your main activity is. You right-click it, add a new Java class. Give the class a name, so let's call it Bowling Series. And click on OK, and it will give you a new document. Notice the package command automatically gets inserted. That's what ties these two things together. We can now refer to this class in our main activity, and we don't have to import it or anything because they're part of the same problem domain. Just a little bit of review about what problem domain classes are. Last semester we called them business classes. I've seen both in the systems books. I've seen both in programming books. Problem domain seems to be a little more generic than business class, but I will probably use the two terms interchangeably, mean basically the same thing. Remember, our problem domains don't do any input, they don't do any output. Typically, they don't access a database directly, but they can send commands like we did in Visual Studio to the database and say, give me that data, and then store it. Class definition includes the class header. That's what we just created. All right, so that's basically the class header, not much to it. Then there are attributes, also known as members, occasionally referred to as properties, but that's a misnomer. Attributes and members mean the same thing. Why can't they make up their mind? Because PhDs have to make money, so they come up with new terms for the same things. And then methods. But notice what's missing here from C# is properties. Remember, in C# we could create properties that allowed us to set and get values of our members. Okay. Those don't exist, and I think I warned you. You can get that. I think I warned you last semester that not most languages don't have properties. So we have to define our own setters and getters. Remember, the setters allow us to allow the outside program to change the value of one of our members, our attributes, and the getters allow us to get it. And remember who the user of a class is. Humans do not interact with classes. Other programs are the users of classes. So here's our class header. In order to access it, it needs to be public. Otherwise, we can't refer to it in the other program. And the keyword class and user info, and I think that's what we got. Yep, automatically by creating it using the shortcuts. Most classes are public. Some of them are protected. If they're protected, that means when you subclass, in other words, make another class using this one, the subclass, which is the one that's using this one, can't change it. So your methods could be protected, or your class itself could be protected. All right, keyword class, we know about that. And here's how we do it in Android Studio. We just did that. Find your project file. That's the one with the COM example on the end. Too late, it's gone. Yep, here it is. It's got the COM example at this end. Find that one, right-click it. That's what we just did. Classes have attributes. Attributes are basically like variables. And they're, more accurately, they're like fields in a database. In a database table, what data do you need to store about this class? So let's add that now to our problem domain or bowling series class here. And I list all these first, and by normal rule, these are private. We do not want the outside world to modify these without our setters validating it. We're going to save the validation for lab 3, but for right now, just remember that usually these are typically private. So I'm going to create a private variable, and I'm going to use a string for the bowler name. Don't initialize them. Private calendar for the bowling date. If you read my notes, there is a date time, but it's been, what's the term, deprecated. It's still out there, but you shouldn't use it. The calendar class is more complete. It's very close to the date time class that we're used to. Syntax is different, but same kind of capabilities. And then we had 3 games that were integers. Couldn't we make these an array or something? Yeah, you could. Let's not make it too complicated. And that's the data that we need to store about a bowling series. One series is the bowler's name, and we could add team name and lanes and which lane were we on if we want that kind of stuff. But we'll, again, keep it simple. You can add more and more stuff to this and make your class more and more powerful. Remember more stuff. Remember also, I mentioned in Programming Logic Intermediate that very often this class will mirror the database table whose data is stored because they're so similar. Why would we have stuff in the database that the class doesn't handle occasionally? Why would we have members data here, attributes here that we don't store in the database and just throw it away when we're done? Not too likely. So again, you can have as many of these as you want. You can also create constants to use for validation. We'll save that for later. Let's keep it simple. Questions about the attributes? Their type can be anything. Other classes, primitive types, doesn't matter. Whatever you need them to be, pick the right type. Again, I'm not going to worry about the descriptions. I have to admit, though, the programs that I read that had thorough documentation, much easier to grade. It just made me feel all warm and fuzzy inside, so thank you very much for having all that documentation. Those of you who skipped it, oh well. I graded it anyways. Didn't cost you. Okay, here's my days between bowling public constant. Basically do it the same way. It's a final, so let's just add that to the top maybe. Well, is it public or is it private? That's the question you have to ask yourself. Do you want the user program, the main program here, to have access to this constant directly? I typically am safe first and say no. I'm going to have a private final integer. Days between bowling, and because it's a final, it's a constant, you must initialize it. Or that's how we create constants. By the way, before I forget, this guy here, is it ever going to change? Are we going to make TV point to anything else? Probably not. So this is also a halfway decent final. Say it's a final. I'm going to set it to point to that guy right there. Done. Doesn't mean you can't change the contents of the text box. It just means the pointer points to this text box forever. So you'll see a lot of examples where these pointers, once they're defined, are given a final attribute because they're probably not going to point to a different object later on. Questions? Back to the notes. We do have static objects. Remember, static are shared. If I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 bowling series in an array list that I got from somewhere in a database. If I want to calculate the statistic of what's the average bowling score from all 10 of those series, I only want to calculate it once, and I could store it inside of a class. I believe, I haven't verified it, at least in C#, any constant is automatically defined as static, because why would we have different versions of days between bowling for different series? We wouldn't. This is automatically static. Static means it's shared by all the instances. They all share that memory, or they all share that value. Just a little bit of review. We'll see them again in the future. All right. Hang on a second, I should have reviewed this. Accessor methods, getters and setters. Okay. Sorry for all the spinning around here on the recording. I'm sure that was fun. As I mentioned before, there are no properties in Java, in JavaScript, and most of those other languages. So we have to define methods for every single setter, every single getter, and any custom methods that we need. Like, remember here, we always calculated the series and we calculated the average. We're going to create custom methods to do that. Calculate the next bowling date, custom method to do that. So I define them, because of my C# background, I define them as setters and getters that allow me to set attribute values or get attribute values. We still need those. In C#, they were buried inside of properties. Here we have to write our own. Kind of tedious. Then we need constructors. Remember those? Constructors are automatically executed whenever you instantiate a variable of this type, of this object, an object of this type. How do we initialize game 1, 2, and 3? How do we initialize the bowler's name? How do we initialize the bowling date? Maybe we don't. If we don't define one, Java will define a generic one for us. Doesn't do much. Defines all those variables pretty much as undefined. So we have to write our own methods. Just a quick review of what methods look like. So I forgot to indent that thing. I noticed it was wrong, but haven't fixed it. Each method, we've already seen them. We've been defining our own methods here in our main activity. We said, I want to write a method called void run array list test. Write another method, private void test bowling. What is all this stuff? This is review. The first part is its accessibility. Can the outside, the main program, access this method directly? Most of the time the answer is yes. So you make them public. Occasionally you'll create a private method that's for internal use only. If we wanted to know how many days are in that days and month routine that we wrote, we might put that in a calendar class of our own if we were writing one, and say the outside world can't know how many days are in a month, but I need it internal here. Those are pretty rare. Methods can, and often do, return a type. I would, if I was changing that this is inconsistent, I fixed one, didn't fix that one, I would make that a capital D double. Okay. We can return a pointer to an object, that works fine. So this is the type of data that the method returns. If it doesn't return anything, you put the type void there. Void is I defined it many years ago as the type of nothing. If you return nothing, then put void in it. Then your method name, and whether you put a verb on it or not, it's kind of up to you. We've gotten pretty used to properties: height, width, average, series. What the main program probably wants is just give me the series, not have to say calculate the series, just give me the series. So putting a verb in front, I'm going to make it optional. I'm going to tend to leave it off because I think it makes the main program a little easier to read. Methods can receive parameters. You can send stuff in. You'll see that setters are going to send in a value. If I'm going to change the value of my attribute, if I'm going to change game one, I need to know what to change it to. If there is a parameter, we have to tell the type of the parameter and give it a local name. What are we going to call it here? I don't care what it's called in the main program, but what are we going to call it here? Then in between here, do a bunch of calculations. And then finally, return a new amount, but only if the return type is double. And for methods inside of a class, most of them return something. Not all of them, but most of them return something. If you're not returning anything, this is void, you can leave out the return statement. When you hit the end curly bracket, it'll return automatically. Elements of Java Style, thanks to Matt, he found a copy of that online that's free. That's how old that book is, they're giving it away. Says this should be camel case, starting with a lowercase letter then uppercase. Our class names should be title case. Every letter, first letter of every word capitalized. So when we created our class bowling name here, or bowling series, notice I started with a capital B. It's become pretty consistent across all languages. Most languages don't care, so they kind of leave it up to the programmer, but that's where this elements of style comes in. And again, that's a 1970s book. I used it in my classes way back when. Now it's been updated slightly, but not a whole lot. We started worrying about this stuff a long time ago. Elements of style, this is one of the places where I'd have to look and see what it says today. It says it should start with a verb since they all do something. That's the part I don't always agree with. This style is like my standards from last semester. It's a guide. You don't like it? Don't use it until somebody's signing a paycheck. Then you follow the style that Skyward, Sentry, Berkshire Hathaway is using. They should have standards. Were there standards, Karen? There are standards for naming things, and yep. There's a what? A wiki. There's a wiki for, yeah, there's a form for that here at Midstate. There's a form for every blooming thing I need to do. And there's a wiki for everything you need to look up at Skyward. It makes sense. Functions cannot return more than one value unless this is an array list. It can return an array list. So we can create a function, a method, that generates a 150,000 element array list and then send it back to the main program. We can do that. But there can only be one type here. An array list of strings, that's one type. A double, that's one type. So a method can only return one value unless that, or let's say one object. Frequently they'll return a value, but they can only return one object. But things like array lists are objects with objects inside, so that's a way to get around that. Pretty rare. Most classes at least include these two, but probably a third. Accessor methods, access, setters and getters, accessors. Accessor methods and constructors. Those we got to have, otherwise we can't use this class for much. The third type of class or method that you might have are what I call the custom methods that actually do calculations, manipulate the data somehow. I don't know of any classes that don't have the custom methods either, but they're not really required. Let's start with the accessor methods. For every single attribute, member, we need to write a method to get it and to set it. So these are going to be public, And Karen did a little research and said they should be public final, right? Is that what it was? I think it was final.
Yeah,
For the setters. In the all right, let's leave that out for right now. I didn't like it anyway. I'm not even gonna bring that up. Karen brought it up, and then we're still having a conversation about it. She did a little research. But anyways, this is my setter. So I'm going to change the value of bowler name. What do I send back when I'm done? Nothing. And typically the setter's name is set followed by the name of the object. Or the name of the, object is good. And now in parentheses, I do need to know what's the new value. Remember in C#, it was automatically called value. In Java, what many programmers will do is call this bowler name. Oops. So here's your new bowler name. Change that bowler name to this new bowler name. That seems a little confusing, doesn't it? You get these two bowler names, this one and that one. How do we tell them apart? Here's how you do it. You say this dot bowler name is equal to the regular old bowler name. That's how you distinguish the two of them. This bowler name refers to that. I'm sorry. Too many thises going on here. Okay. The one after the equal sign refers to this one. The word this refers to this current instantiation of the object. Was it this in C# or was it me, this? Yeah. Forget all the languages, got different names for it. Most of it, this, refers to this instantiation of the object, me. My bowler name, change it to this one that got sent in. Not too hard. Now let's do the getter. The getter returns the current bowler name, whatever it is. So we put the word get in front. Nothing gets sent in because we want to get the current value, and we simply return this dot bowler name. So there's your typical setters and getters. They make sense? We're simply allowing the outside world using public methods to change or get this. That's their only purpose in life. Until next unit, when this setter gets more complicated by doing validation. I'm not setting it if it's a bad value. The getter never gets more complicated. It never did in C#. It rarely, I've never written a program where my getter is more complicated than just that. Give me the current value of what's in it. The setter typically looks like this with validation wrapped around it. If everything's cool, take that new bowler name and stuff it into this dot bowler name. This name, by the way, you can change it if you wanted to do the C# thing. You can call it value and call it value, and that works fine. And if you do that, you really don't need the this. So most Java programmers like to put it in there if they're referring to one of their members. But you don't need it because now it's not ambiguous anymore. It knows you're talking about that one. It's the only one that's available to it. But now that I've made those changes, I'm going back. Because this is typically what you'll see. Not too bad. But imagine if you had 20 of these things. Not too tough to think of a table with 20 fields in it. And now I got to type each one of those or cut and paste and change names. Android Studio to the rest of you. Delete them. After all that great typing I did? Yeah. I don't know if they're going to cause problems if we leave them there or not. In the middle of your method, or pardon me, in the middle of your class, right click. Generate. What do you want to generate? Getters and setters. For which ones? Shift click. All of them. Except that one, Control click or command click on a Mac. Go. Look familiar? Exactly the same as we did a little while ago. Automatic. You guys are so lucky. I'm tempted to take that 20 points for lab 2 and shrink it down to 10 because half of it's done with right clicks. So there is all of our setters and getters. All done, ready for us to set and get values of the members. Very easy. Okay. Questions about setters and getters? All the explanations that I just talked about. Here's the getters, nothing too exciting in there. What you will sometimes see for a getter, notice the names. It even created the names for us. Cool is that. This never changes much, so you'll often see this. Just put it all on one line so it doesn't take up much room. Remember, C# did that inside the properties. If you don't want to, don't bother. Save a little bit of space, go ahead. But it's not going to change processing at all. It probably isn't going to change the efficiency at all either. Questions about setters and getters? All right, constructors are used to define what should be done whenever we instantiate this class. Let's go talk about instantiation first, come back to that. Now going back to main, my main activity. And here's my test bowling. And I now want to instantiate an element, an object of my class. Just like any other class, you start with the class name or the type. It's a bowling series. What do you want to call it? Oh, let's call it series. Or let's just say it's a series for Voker. Does that instantiate it? You might think so, but no. That only works with primitive types. It makes an actual variable. What this makes is a pointer. Now again, for the recording, I'm just pointing in the air with my finger. This is a pointer to a bowling series because a bowling series is this complicated thing. And here's a pointer. It doesn't point to anything right now. It's a null pointer. If you try to do something with it, you'll get null reference errors. It doesn't point to anything. When it does point to something, it can only point to, it's a specific type of pointer, it can only point to a bowling series. I cannot link this pointer to a calendar, for instance, or to an array list. Can't do it. So what most people do when they define this is immediately instantiate it, but it doesn't have to be done here, so let's do it separately to start. And somewhere later in the program, you can say Voker series equals a new bowling series. That instantiates it. Should sound familiar. We did that once or twice in programming logic or intermediate. If you want, you can combine these by simply taking this and sticking it on the end up here and do it all at once. Make me a pointer and immediately make it point to a new instantiation. But if we're creating lots of instantiations, maybe in a loop, it doesn't work that way. Got to do it on separate lines. You can do either one. Now the question becomes, what's in Voker series bowler name? No, probably. Because in my class, there are no constructors here. Whenever we instantiate, the constructor automatically executes. I don't have a constructor. Since there isn't one, Java makes a pretend one. creates one, puts a string in it, puts a calendar in it, puts 1, 2, 3 games in it. And since they're all classes, initializes them all to null. Even your game 1, 2, and 3 are all null because they're capital I integers. They're classes, so they're null. Not garbage, not zero, null. Okay, that's not bad. Many people, you'll see lots of classes without a constructor in them at all. They just use that default constructor where everything is set to null, and you better darn put stuff in there before you try to do something with it. Not bad. But we can, if we wish, define our own constructors to say, here's what I want you to do. Android Studio allowed us to create setters and getters. You think it'll do constructors? Right click, generate, dun, 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 constructor. There's only one. Yeah, okay, let's take it. What do you want to send into this constructor is what it's now asking you. When you call this constructor, what do you want to send it? I'm going to say none to start with. And now I get an empty constructor. Is this where you're saying the final goes? Not here either. Okay, I'm all confused then. I thought it went here. Okay, so here you get to say what do you want to do for every, and you should do this for every single member. So we can say this dot bowler name equals the empty string. That way if I forget, it won't crash my program with a null reference. It'll simply give me an empty bowler name. Maybe you want your program to crash with a null reference. I don't know. This dot bowling date. Oh, I'm not going to do that one. I'm going to comment it in here. Say this dot bowling date equals, and then you figure it out. Once you read my notes, struggle your way through my notes and apply this to your lab 2. Figure out how to instantiate a bowling date, how to use those calendar thingies. So we won't be able to in this sample, I don't have enough time anyways, in this sample we won't have enough time to play with the calendars. We'll do that next week, yes, because by then you will have turned it in and figured it out. So let's set the 3 scores to nothing, to 0, excuse me. And that's one kind of constructor. It's very similar to the default constructor, except it doesn't leave them all at null. It sets them to humanly recognizable missing values, if you will. Got a 0 in that game? Really? No, you just never set game 3. The name is blank? Really? No, I just forgot to set it. But at least the program doesn't crash. If you try to display a null string, you should get an error. I haven't done it in a while, but I think you get an error. The nice thing about constructors, and all methods for that matter, is they can be overloaded. Overloaded means I have 2 methods with the same name. I have 2 methods with the same, it's like me saying, Aaron, come up here. Which one of them's going to come up here? They're both looking at me like, you mean me? You mean me? How can we tell them apart? Same problem with having 2 methods with the same name. When you call it or when you instantiate, how does it know which one to use? They have to have a different signature. This is the terminology it's used in object-oriented programming for overloaded methods. The methods have to have a different signature. The signature is comprised of the return type, the name, which in our case is going to be the same because we just said it's going to be overloaded. That means the name is the same. And the parameters. They have to differ somehow. So maybe the other one returns, well, constructors don't return anything. So the only thing we have to play with in constructors is we can send in different kind of data. So let's right click and generate another constructor. But this time, let's tell it that I want the name, and we can use any combination we want. The name and the one, oops, control click doesn't work. Oh, command, sorry. I want those 4 things sent in. Now remember from our programming logic intermediate discussions, when you send stuff into a method, you got to send that stuff in. Which means I can't use this constructor unless I send it 4 pieces of information, starting with a string followed by 3 integers. If I send it anything else, it's going to say, don't know what you're talking about.
Delegate.
Pardon me?
Like a delegate.
Like a delegate that they don't know about. Kinda. Delegates are a little more beyond that. Delegates actually take over for somebody. This is not a delegate. Right, this is an overloaded method, which is like a delegate, okay, but not the same. So notice this one that it built. It's still called bowling series, just like that one. But it's got a different signature. It's got different stuff in the parentheses, and so we can tell it apart. Let's see if we get any errors in main here. Notice no complaints. This said, instantiate me a bowling series and put nothing in there and send nothing in. Well, to instantiate, we go to the constructor. So we come back here and say, constructor, are you the right constructor? No, it's got stuff in it. Are you the right? Oh yeah, we're going to use this one. So it can tell them apart. You cannot have 2 methods with the same signature. That'll give you an error. You'll get a duplicates defined. But I could create, don't do this, I'm going to delete it when I'm done. I can create another constructor. Please. Where'd it go? Did I lose a curly bracket somewhere along the way here? My class curly bracket got lost, or I'm scrolled over. Oh, still there. One more time. Generate. There we go. Constructor. This one, I only want to send in the name. Done. So this has a different signature than that one because it only expects one thing. So you can have lots of these constructors. Remember the message box class? You could send it a message and it was happy. Or you could send it a message and a title and it was happy. Or you could send it a message and a title and an icon and tons of stuff, right? Any of those could work. How could they all have the same name, messagebox.show, but accept different kinds of parameters? There's 2 ways to do that. One is to overload and the other is to have optional parameters. You'll learn about optional parameters later.
Does this like and see let you call it the null constructor from the other constructor?
It's a good question. What he wants to know is, could I up here in this one, instead of doing all this stuff, just say this? And I don't know how to do it.
No, I would leave that. I mean,
no, this is the one where you would do it because this one with the generic stuff would call this one, sending it the empty string and 3 zeros. I just don't know how to do it. Yes. Forgotten how to do it though. So instead of typing all this stuff over and over and over again, what Reen is suggesting is, couldn't we just invoke this one from this one? Let's not go there. If you can figure that out, more power to you. Okay, so here's my second constructor, and notice when it built it for me, it put in 4 parameters, and immediately transferred them to the data members. I didn't have to write a lick of code. How nice is that? Another 2-point part in your assignment that's pretty hard to screw up unless you're like Kevin and typing everything manually. Right? But this is, we've been talking about how you learn how to learn new languages. Notice we've shifted now. We've gone to the object-oriented part. We learned about loops. We learned about how to create methods, just basic ones. We learned about if statements and switch statements and how to do math. And we learned a few other things, custom classes, how to mess with strings is usually pretty important. Took a look at arrays and array lists or collections. And that's a pretty good tool set now. So now we need to know, how do I create my own objects? Create my own classes. Where was I going with this? I forget. But it's all part of the learning. Oh, and then the other part of learning is there's a new IDE. Man, Visual Studio or Android Studio, that was cool. I could right click and generate constructors, setters, getters, save myself a ton of typing. In C Sharp, it was type, I forget what it was, prop full, right? Prop full, tap, tap. Is there a way to generate this stuff? That's another one of those questions you're asking in the back of your mind because, you know, when Visual Studio 15, when you download that, it's out, by the way, you're already out of date. When that comes along, what's different? Well, that's a Google question for you. Google it. Say, what's different in 2015? Anything you don't understand, just ignore it. But if it says there's new snippets that you can put in for this, that, and the other thing, you go, oh, cool, I can maybe use that. All right, so how do I use this one? I just have to call it the right way. So to the main activity now. I'm going to create another bowling series, and we'll call this one the Reen series, and that's equal to the bowling series. And notice now, I was hoping there'd be two of them, but there's not. Usually we get some kind of a clue that there's two different ways to do this. There we go. You could either send it with no parameters, or here is another signature that you can follow. Visual Studio did this for you when you did Message Box. It gave you like 25 choices. Which one of these different overloads do you want? The more of these constructors you create, the more options you'll see here. And I don't know what happens if I click on this. Probably nothing. Yep, it's just a visual clue that you need a string first. Okay, Reen, that's a string. Then, notice when I press comma, just like Visual Studio, it bold faces. Here's what you got to do next. And as long as you send it 4 pieces of information with a string first followed by 3 integers, it's happy. Let's do a little test. I'm going to just copy this one. Now that didn't work, but close enough. I don't, well, now we're going to get an error down there. So copy it, paste it. I was trying to control drag it, but I keep forgetting the Mac doesn't like to do that. Okay, so now let's display these. How do I display them? I'm just going to put it in my output, and I'm going to say tv.setText, and I'm going to wipe it out to start with. And then I want to see what's in that Volcker record. So I'm going to say tv. I could have, let's just, append text. We could have used the one up above. A couple of you did this, and I thought it was really cool. You said that the name is, and then you concatenated the name. So how do I get to it? By the object name and then dot notation. Volcker series dot. And here's all the things I can do. What do I want? I want to get the bowler name. Well, that's a little weird, right? Why is it called get bowler name? Because it's a method, it's not a property. Can you change the names of those? Probably. Probably not a good idea. Most places will use the word get, but I want to get the bowler name. Gives me the parentheses. And then what many of you did is said this. Let's do it right. And here's the cool part. You just kept going. In one append statement, you appended a whole bunch of stuff and just indented each line so it looked like a line. And instead of having 6 append statements, you did one that just continued on to the next line. I thought that was pretty cool. So then the only thing, we could look at the date, but we don't know how to display date. So we'll let you figure that out. So let's just go get the name or the games. So game 1, get out of the way. Escape didn't make it go away. Game 1 is typing this way too many times.
So just copy the whole game one line.
Pardon me?
Copy the whole game one line.
Yes, you're right, I should. I got 2 more games coming to look just like it. And if you're not sure, this would be a good place to test, but I'm pretty sure. So now I'm going to copy this. And highlight some text. Press, I can't have to do it from edit. Replace.
Under
Find, yep. Find, replace, Command R. Would have got it. And here I want to replace Volker with Reen. In selection is checked. Replace all. Done.
You didn't define arrow series.
Thank you. What I don't like about Android Studio is it changes text red instead of underline squiggling it. Some things that underline squiggles, text red, just doesn't catch my eye. I'm not used to it. I guess it'll take a little bit of time. Okay, let's see if we get our 3 bowling scores for both of those people. Is he yelling at me about something or just thinking? There we go. Name is blank, 1, 2, 3, green, those are the scores. And so that demonstrates a couple of things, how to create special constructors, different kinds. And remember, you don't need to do either one of them, except my assignment says to do it. You don't need to do either one of them because if you don't do it, most languages will create this default everything's null object where all the members are null and your main program has to somehow set those. Okay, the third kind, and then we'll call it a day here, the third kind of method are what I call custom methods. They're not setters, they're not getters, they're not constructors. They're just methods. I give them I call them custom methods that do calculations and manipulate the data somehow. So let's create a method that calculates the average. And now this again is, do you call it calc average? Or do you just call it lowercase average or uppercase average? If we were following the C# examples, we would put in an uppercase average because all the property names were named uppercase. Again, the elements of style said put a verb in front of that. What does Skyward say? You know? Put a verb in front of it? Not sure. Okay. Now, what I forgot is what type is this? It's going to be a double. Okay. So this is a method name called average, and what you name it is kind of up to you. Just be consistent. If you're making this calc average, that's perfectly acceptable. If you're making it lowercase a average, yeah, I can live with that too. What do we have to send it? Nothing. But what we're asking for is the average of the games in this record. So I'm going to do it all in one command. Remember back in Programming Logic Intermediate, we created a variable for the series to add them all up, and then we divided that by 3 to calculate the average, and then we sent that back. And actually, I'm kind of doing this inside out, but let's do it anyway. Return, parentheses, this dot game 1. Do I really need the this? No. Plus this dot game 2 plus this dot game 3 divided by 3. Why is it not happy? There's no doubles. You said they're not all doubles. You gotta quit answering questions. You're not in this class. He said there's no doubles. Not exactly true. Or none of them are doubles or whatever. The real answer is none of them are doubles. I don't remember what you said. But the real answer is none of them are doubles. Integer plus integer plus integer is an integer. Divided by an integer is an integer. You can't stick that into a double, surprisingly. You could stick it into a lowercase double. That usually works, but not an uppercase double. So the easy solution is this. Now this calculates as an integer divided by a double. C# goes, hang on a second, or into C#. Java says, hang on a second, converts the first answer into a double, so it's doing double math, and then everything works fine. You put it right in the return statement if it's nice and short and neat like this. If it gets ugly and it's complicated like that payment formula, maybe not. Calculate it first. Some of you said I'm going to calculate the top half, then I'm going to calculate the bottom half. I'm going to take the top divided by the bottom. Cool. Very easy to understand versus the big long formula that most of you gave me. Many of you split that up into parts. I thought that was pretty effective maintenance-wise. How do I use this method? Piece of cake. And we'll use Reens because he's got stuff. Got to have those parentheses. It's always a method. Remember in C# it was a little confusing because if you called it a property, then you don't put parentheses on it. If you did, you get an error. But if you made it a method, then you had to put parentheses on, and if you don't, you get an error. So you had to keep all that straight. Here, everything gets parentheses. There are no properties. And here's one of those examples where I can do a Command-Shift-Return, and it'll finish that line, jump to the end, put semicolons on it. That's kind of cool to finish stuff up. And now I should get an ugly looking average probably, depending on how that adds up. But the point is, this is how we get at it. By asking, hey, you Reen series, that object, what's your average given your current numbers? You can define as many of those as you want. Programming logic, beginning, we created methods. No, we just did the math. So we could create a series one now, right? That says, what's your series? It adds them up. Okay, we got a couple minutes. That went pretty quick, so let's do that real quick. Let's do a series here. But the series calculates an integer. Again, I'm going to try to be consistent. And it just adds these guys up. Can I now refer to this method from inside of that method? Absolutely. So this is kind of redundant because now I'd have to, is it terrible? Short, so maybe not. I can just say series, parentheses, calculate the series. Now I don't need these outer parentheses anymore. And divide by 3. Or I could say this dot series, divide by 3. I think the purists would say you should say this. Where is this method? Well, geez, if there's nothing in front of it, where else could it be? It has to be local. But the purists will put this in there, try to be consistent. I'm not a purist yet. Campus dean now. I let all kinds of stuff slide. What happened?
Capital S. want the new line in
You see what he's doing? He's paying attention. The rest of you guys start doing, they want to screw stuff up. Make me fix it. He's used to it. He's been doing it for 2 years. He's used to me screwing up. So Wednesdays I might have to kick him out and see if you guys are paying attention. Keep my code straight. Make sure it works. Then we'll call it good. It's weird that I click on that. It goes right back to green. Okay. Now you're almost the same place you were with classes at the end of programming logic beginning, except for one thing. Throwing exceptions. What happens if we give it a bad game? It's greater than 300. How do we deal with that in this language? Next set of notes, I haven't reviewed them yet, so if you want to read ahead, feel free, but they might change. But that's lab 3, is to add the validation to our loans. So before I turn off the recording, just a reminder, this coming Friday, lab 2 is due without any validation, not much more than what I just did here. And I was giving Tyler some advice to, I think my lab says, copy lab 1 and call it lab 2 or something like that. And then wipe out all the code. If you're smart, you'll comment out all the code so that you can paste it in places later, like that big ugly formula. Comment it out and then remove it when everything seems to be done. Just kind of build it in pieces. And on Sunday, the ticket for that day is due. The reading before then, obviously. Questions before I turn off the recording? Okay. The rest of the time is lab. I will help you if you have questions about what's wrong with your program 1, or if you're stuck with lab 2, I can help you with that as well.